when you watch a video of people existing 30 years ago, the conversations that come up is like, oh my God, they don't have cell phones, or how did they get around without a GPS in their car? You know, and like, you know, and we were both alive in those times. I remember what it was like to get around without a GPS. I remember what it was like to not have a cell phone. I remember what it was like to have, we used to, like when I grew up, we had a party line, right? So we had a phone line that was shared with like 6 neighbors.
Yeah, we did
right?
as well, yeah.
Yeah,
you'd pick it up and you'd be in the middle of someone else's conversation. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, exactly, right?
And then half an hour later, you'd pick it up again and say, are you fucking joking? You're still on? Get the fuck off. I've got to phone someone. Put it down.
Yeah, you know.
Yeah,
and
we had that. In fact, my mum and our neighbour next door, my mum used to bang on the wall with a special signal. And then Isabel next door would pick up the phone and the two of them would chat over the phone.
There you go.
Rather than walk outside to one another's houses.
Well, that's funny.
Crazy.
You know, so it's like, you know, and at the time that's, you know, so when we look at our current state, we're on the bleeding edge of existence, right? So it's hard for us to fathom where things are going to go. We all have theories and things always take us by surprise, you know, in some way, you know, and it's just weird how, like, because you think back 30 years ago, no one thought like, how am I going to get around without a GPS? Because like, there wasn't a thing, right? You're just like, whatever, I'm just going to go. You know, like I'll follow the rivers, I'll follow the stars, I'll buy a map at the gas station. Like I'll be fine.
Yeah.
You know, like I'll ask for directions. I'll get to the car and say, where am I? You know where you are. I don't know where I am. Can you tell me where I am? You know, like that's even the thought of that conversation sounds alien now. Like asking a perfect stranger where you are. You know, like nowadays you wouldn't trust someone. You're just gonna trust some stranger to tell you where you are.
No, that's right. Yeah, on reflection, it was a bizarre time. I remember making social arrangements, you know, like when I used to have lots and lots of friends, we'd all be going to the cinema. There'd be like sort of half a dozen of you all going to the cinema. So you'd have to agree weeks in advance to book a spot that everybody could make, and then you'd have to wait and see who turned up because you had no way of speaking to anybody who was on their way or who was still at home because you didn't have you couldn't just phone somebody, say, where are you? Or even now in the family, we've got this app, 360 it's called, and you can literally see where everybody is in the family. You know, you just click on it and it's, oh, Lily's still at her flat in Malaga. Oh, Ali's finished walking the dog, she's on her way back. She'll be back soon, right? I'll stick the kettle on. You know, it's like it's a completely different way of existing. And it's nice that one of the great things about our old films and things is that they preserved all of that, you know. So, you know, Stranger Things, you know, is a great example of that. You know, it took everybody by storm because it was in the days before all of this technology. So it seems like a much more innocent era. Of course, it wasn't really, but you know, you can set something in the 80s and it seems like, well, it is so last century. You know, it's just so old-fashioned by some people's standards, although it seems just like yesterday to me. It's bizarre.
It's funny too, Stranger Things, I watched the first season of that show and I haven't got back into it because like I don't like the Netflix model where you watch like 10 episodes and then 3 years later you get the next season or 2 years later.
Right.
You know, so like the way TV used to work is you'd spend like 10 months watching a show episodically like every week or so, and then they're back 2 months later with the new season, right? Whereas,
yeah.
So it was easy to keep up. So like I remember I started watching this season 2 of Stranger Things and I was like, I can't remember what happened in season 1, and I couldn't be bothered to rewatch it. But the thing about that show is what got me into wanting to get into analog synthesizers, right? Because the music of the show is clearly, unless I can't tell if it's a digital emulation or if it's actual analog gear, but the music they play, it's always slightly out of tune, like the soundtrack music. And I remember when I heard that, I went,
it's very John Carpenter in that respect. John Carpenter stuff is like that, yeah.
Yeah, and I didn't appreciate John Carpenter because to me he existed before I was born, right? So it was just like that was just the way movies sounded when I was growing up, like synthesizers instead of orchestra, right? So, and then so my impression of what synthesizers were is like Huey Lewis and the News, you know, or like when you know, or like Yes with the Lonely Heart, you know, like that kind of stuff. For me, like it was this, like that to me that was what synthesizers were. Like I didn't think synthesizers when I heard Pink Floyd. I thought he was playing like a Hammond organ all the time. I didn't realize Richard Wright was using synthesizers too. So to me, they always sounded too pristine, and they sounded too like they sounded out of place to me, like especially in 80s music. Synthesizers always sounded like they were music adjacent, Like the band was doing all this stuff, and there's some guy standing there with a keyboard.
Yeah, they were in the 80s, because that was the advent of digital, and digital got very clean and very sort of, and everybody embraced it because it was the new thing, and it was so clean and nice, you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, there was a lot of that kind of, as you say, good phrase, music adjacent.
Yeah. And then so when I heard the Stranger Things, it reminded me, or at least it didn't say it reminded me, it made me aware that part of the synthesizer thing was struggling to keep things in tune, right? Like, so what became almost like we were talking about earlier, but the tape noise and like the nostalgic like need to put that noise in the music, that appealed to me. And I'm sure a lot of other people in my age group where they're like, oh my God, I didn't know synthesizers could sound so organic and so real. You know, because in reality, synthesizers are just as real as a guitar. But I grew up in an era where synthesizers were cheating, right? Like that was the perception.
Yeah.
Especially when you grew up listening to Nirvana, right? Like, because the 90s was like a complete rejection of synthetic music, right? It was back to basics, no guitar solos, right? Big bombastic drums, angry lyrics, and just messy music, right? This like punk rock with like a darker version of punk rock. Like instead of fuck the world, like fuck myself, like fuck my life.
Yeah.
And but guys like Trent Reznor, they weren't confused. He was like, no, synthesizers are great. Like, his Nine Inch Nails existed in the grunge era, like shamelessly, like with synthesizers all over the stage. Every member of the band had to play synthesizer, like including the drummer, to make that thing happen, you know? So it took ignorance and whatnot. But yeah, it was the Stranger Things that popped that bubble for me to make me realize that synthesizers weren't the enemy. It was taste. It's all about taste.
Which is bizarre, because it's set unapologetically in the 80s, and they reference Never Ending Story, which was an 80s film and all that kind of stuff. And you know, that song, I think, was a Giorgio Moroder, is
Moroder?
that? Yeah, I can't remember the
Maybe, yeah.
I think it was, or it was something very, very akin to that. So the synthesizers of the 80s were that kind of pristine kind of, or they tended towards that, although there was a lot of analog synthesis around then. But to me, the Stranger Things sort of synthy stuff relates to the 70s. Really, that is the sound of the 70s to me, because there's a famous example. Well, it's maybe not famous, but I was reading about it recently, so it's famous. It's famous to me. It was Tangerine Dream's album Phaedra. I don't know if you're familiar with that one.
Absolutely, I am, because of Bandersnatch, that Black Mirror movie.
Oh, right. And there's
watched that one yet?
I haven't. No, I don't know what that is. No.
Well, so Bandersnatch, I'll let you go back to the out-of-tune synths on Phaedra.
Okay.
But you've seen the show Black Mirror, I'm sure. Like, I think Lily got you into it, right?
She did, but I haven't actually embraced it. I've seen one or two things, but I've moved on. I just haven't got time for everything. You know, that's one of the problems.
Of course. So, unfortunately or fortunately, the Black Mirror and Netflix tried to revolutionize movies. So they made a movie on Netflix about 5 years ago called Bandersnatch, and it's a choose-your-own-adventure movie.
Right.
So every couple minutes, you have to pick what the main character is going to do. Is he going to make A choice or B choice? And one of the choices is he meets this guy that's like changes his mind about he's a video game programmer, and this guy he envies. He ends up working with this guy who's like his favorite programmer, and he's asking him for help. And the programmer, first thing he asks him, he goes, "What kind of music do you listen to when you program?" And he's like, "I listen to this, and that." And he's like, "That's shit music. You need to listen to this." And he gives him a list of albums he should be listening to while he programs. And Phaedra is on there, and so was a Tomita record. I forget what Isaiah Tomita record it was on there. So he goes to the record store and he finds at least 2 records off the list, Tangerine Dream and Tomita.
Right.
And you have to pick which record he buys. You know, and that determines like what course of action he goes to next, right?
Oh, right.
And,
okay.
So I think I picked Tangerine Dream because I was more familiar with him than Tomita.
Uh-huh.
But of course, the next day, the first thing I did is I downloaded both those records and listened to them. And I've been a Tangerine Dream fan and a Tomita fan ever since.
Right, cool.
But yeah. Sorry,
that's okay. There's a famous example on that album towards the end of the long track, Phaedra, where the synth goes out of tune. They spent weeks trying to keep this thing in tune, literally. And eventually they just gave up and said, okay, it's part of the sound. And it drifts off wonderfully. It's just got this, it's kind of just, it's just so great, you know. That was one of the first albums I ever bought. That was one of the ones. I may have told you the story before, but this is just bizarre. It's so bizarre that I can't actually believe it happened. But you know the internationally famous pedophile Jimmy
Saville?
Jimmy Saville, right? Who's now infamous all around the world, largely thanks to Louis Theroux. But okay, so Jimmy Saville had a show on Saturday afternoons called Jimmy Saville's Speakeasy, in which young people were invited to go to the show and speak their mind on the topic of the day. You know, young idealistic people. God knows what was happening behind the scene, but if we can gloss over that for a minute. And on the show that day were Tangerine Dream.
Oh yeah.
Tangerine Dream are going to play live. Now, I don't know what Tangerine Dream played live if you were there in that audience. But what was played on the radio for that sequence was Mysterious Semblance at the Strand of Nightmares from the Phaedra album. And I just completely blew my mind, and I went out as soon as I could and bought that album. So it's been my constant companion ever since. And Stephen Wilson has remixed it, done a fantastic job remixing it, absolutely brilliant. So that's a great example of that's the synthesizers. That's what I thought were synthesizers. That and Wish You Were Here. That's what synthesizers were to me.
Welcome to the Machine. Welcome to the Machine is the best synthesizer stuff you could point a finger at.
Yeah, that woo, that kind of stuff. Oh, fucking brilliant. Yeah.
Well,
yeah,
and like the esoteric stuff, like he's trying to make it sound like an elevator going into a room. You know, like like instead of sampling things, he's like, I'm going to do my best to make that sound. You know, and like if you compare it to an elevator, it doesn't sound like an elevator, but without elevator in the room, you're convinced you're in an elevator.
Yeah, I must listen to that in Dolby Atmos, because I wonder how you can hear the elevator doors opening, and then you can hear the people, and the conversation all dies down. Oh, what a moment that is! I must listen to that with Dolby Atmos and see if it lives better or worse. I think it's going to live better. But yeah, there was all that stuff. So that was synthesizers to me. Synthesizers was, I now realise, was square wave sine tones and sawtooth. That's basically all there was. There wasn't a lot more than that. And then samplers changed everything. And when you combine sampling and synthesis together, then it goes. You know, the doors just open to all of these sonic possibilities. And these days you've got wavetables and wow.